Hey everybody, I'm back with another video. Now, of course, I promised that I would eventually do this review, at the end of my Army of the Dead review. Never got a chance to see it because, plans ended up shifting around, and unfortunately, couldn't actually see the movie on its opening weekend, so I'm making up for it now. And it was either that or I would have to watch The Conjuring 3, and nothing against Conjuring, anything like that just doesn't really interest me, so I'm like, I'll watch this. So I'm finally giving my review for A Quiet Place Part 2. Now, to give you some background, I dug the first A Quiet Place. In fact, the first time I ever watched A Quiet Place was back in March of 2020, back when this movie was supposed to release. And for those who are unaware, this movie ended up getting delayed a lot. It was initially set to release on March 20th of last year, but then of course it ended up, getting delayed because of, the current status of the world, and it kept getting pushed back and back and back until it finally came out last week. So yeah, that's really cool. But yeah, back to what I was saying before. I really dug the first A Quiet Place film because I really find it fascinating about how so many people, whenever they start making movies, they usually start off in the horror genre. Because think about it. Sam Raimi, first film he ever made, The Evil Dead. First movie that Fred Dekker ever made, Night of the Creeps. At least I think so. For those wondering who Fred Dekker is, he's a freaking collaborator with Shane Black, who Shane Black would later go on to do stuff that he would write the first Lethal Weapon movie. He did uncredited rewrites on the first Predator film with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He would later go on to write and direct a really cool underrated film starring Robert Downey Jr. called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. A bunch of other stuff. And even some actors that, of course, most people know today, like Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, the first ever movie she did was Halloween. Paul Rudd, his film debut, if you will, was actually in Halloween 6. Yeah. A lot of people, of course, get their start in horror. So, it's really interesting the fact that John Krasinski, who most people, of course, know as Jim from The Office, he would later go on to make a movie like A Quiet Place. And he would start out with this really horror-driven movie, which is really fascinating. And apparently, it was actually based off of a spec script that was written by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, if I remember correctly. But for this movie, I believe it was specifically John Krasinski that wrote the entire thing. He rewrote he shared a screenwriting credit on the first movie with Scott Beck and Brian Woods. But for this, it's just sole writing credit for him here. But yeah, so I dug the first A Quiet Place. Definitely thought it was really suspenseful for what it was, and I definitely really enjoyed it. Also find it really interesting the fact that in the movie we have John Krasinski and Emily Blunt portraying a wife and husband, when in real life they're actually married, so I think that's always kind of neat to know. But anyways, I did dig the first A Quiet Place. And yeah, I really dug A Quiet Place Part 2. There are very few movies, in my opinion, in which, there are always those sequels that I think rarely can be able to surpass the original. Horror is definitely a genre in which a lot of sequels to a lot of horror films usually kind of stink. The Halloween and Friday the 13th franchises and Nightmare on Elm Street, they're all great examples of horror movie sequels. With each new installment, you just get more and more of that diminishing results every time. Not this one, though. This one's actually really, really well done. Really love how the fact that it takes place directly following the events of the first A Quiet Place. Like, this takes place almost instantly after the events of what ended up happening in the first movie. So the basic premise, of course, for the movie is that it, like I said before, it takes place immediately after the first movie, and the family, the Abbott family, now after, their father's death, who was, of course, played by John Krasinski, after he died, they're now trying to have to move on and trying to figure out, sort of what to do next. While also, of course, trying to survive in this world. First of all, performances from everybody, they're all solid. Emily Blunt, of course, she's always an incredible actress, from stuff like The Devil Wears Prada to Mary Poppins Returns and a couple of other things. She's fantastic. Oh yeah, also check out Edge of Tomorrow because that's a really great film that she's into with Tom Cruise. But anyways, I thought she did a really great job here. Millicent Simmonds, who portrayed John Krasinski's character's daughter in the first Quiet Place, of course, reprised her role for this. And what I found really interesting about this movie is that she's actually the focus of the movie. Like, in fact, she could almost be seen as the main character. And what I find really cool is that her character in the movie is deaf, and she uses sign language to communicate with people. Which is really great because Simmonds in real life is also deaf. So I think that's actually really, really cool that they're able to do that. And I really like how John Krasinski, when he was initially doing the first A Quiet Place, he didn't think he would do a follow-up. But then he came up with the idea of having Millicent Simmonds' character be the center of the next movie, and that's why he made it. And not only this, but we also get, of course, Noah Jupe, who, of course, portrays the son, also does great too. But Cillian Murphy, who is actually a new addition to the film, and I think he did a great job. Like, obviously, of course, every apocalyptic like setting, they're always going to have those people in which they feel like that they've completely lost hope and that there's no point anymore and that they feel like they've lost everything. But then something comes along and it revitalizes and gives them purpose again. And that's Cillian Murphy's character, and he did a fantastic job. Like he's almost unrecognizable. Like, initially, like, I could not tell the fact that was Cillian Murphy. Because, I've seen him in stuff like, Batman Begins and Inception and a lot of other Christopher Nolan movies that he's been a part of. But, yeah, he actually did a really great job with the material that was given. And another thing about this movie that I really loved was the cinematography. Like, holy crow, this movie looks fantastic. There were actually several shots throughout the movie that, as it kept going on, I'm like, man, this live-action HBO Last of Us series is looking pretty good. Like, as I was watching this, it definitely gave me hardcore Last of Us vibes, even down to the fact that there were even, of course, the monsters that, they're attracted to sound, which, of course, reminds me a lot of the clickers from The Last of Us. Which, of course, is a really unique idea, the fact that it's about these monsters that hunt via sound. That's a really unique concept. But yeah, cinematography and and a lot of the shots of these movies look absolutely fantastic. Like, apparently I didn't actually know this until, Chris Stuckman reviewed it for his channel. He actually mentioned about how they actually shot the movie on 35mm film, and I had no idea because it looks so incredible. But yeah, I thought it was fantastic. And I also, of course, like sequels do, you expect it to, I'm trying to figure out how the correct way to process this. You'd expect it to sort of be a bit of a retread. Like, there are some elements that would carry over from the original over to this. And well, yeah, of course, because it's a sequel, it has to carry over a lot of elements from the original. They do a lot of new stuff that I think is really fascinating. Like the opening sequence. Which is really cool because the first movie actually didn't showcase this happening. Because it took place like around almost over a year into this whole apocalyptic like setting where these monsters hunt via sound. What was interesting about this was that the opening of the movie centered on day one and showed how the Abbott family first reacted and first found themselves in the situation of having to deal with these monsters. And I thought that was a really interesting and unique choice that Krasinski ended up going with. And yeah, I never thought I'd say this, but holy crow, John Krasinski's a fantastic director. Like, he can do more than just be Jim from The Office. I mean, of course, I kind of already knew that with stuff like Jack Ryan and a couple of other projects that Krasinski is currently doing. But man, A Quiet Place Part 2 definitely solidified him as like a big-time name in terms of being more than just an actor. That he can do more than just act. He can write, direct, and do a lot of other really big stuff like this. Which I thought was really fantastic. Yeah. Now, of course, being a horror film, it needs to be scary. Was it scary? Absolutely. There were so many moments throughout this movie in which I was practically on the edge of my seat. And there were moments that actually made me verbally gasp out in the audience, Because, because I was really invested in what was going on. And the thing is, it's actually a relatively short movie because it's like 94 minutes. Like, it's actually a relatively short movie. And I did not know this. Like, I legitimately thought the fact that when we got to a certain point in the movie that it was supposed to be wrapping up, I just thought there was going to be more in the movie. Turns out that was where it was sort of drawing to a close. And it's like, no, I don't want this to end, which definitely solidifies how good of a movie it is. When you want to see more of it, you don't want it to end. That's a great sign, the fact that you're doing your job right of entertaining the people. Now, of course, if there was one thing that I really had to sort of like little bitty nitpick with, because I thought this was a really great movie, and I really don't see anything wrong, relatively wrong with it, but the thing is that it definitely sort of feels like that with the ending, which I will not spoil for you, or any of the other bigger elements that happen in the movie. There is a moment towards of course, when the movie finally does end, it feels like the fact that there's clearly more story to be told. And it definitely ends on that note in which there's probably going to be another movie. I mean, literally like about a week after the movie released, Paramount dated a 2023 release for a Quiet Place spin-off movie. It's not part 3, but it's a spin-off. Which is really interesting because Emily Blunt, she recently did an interview with Collider, if I remember correctly. She stated in that this is just only going to be... This is actually part 2 of a 3-part story. And that John Krasinski does have an idea for a 3rd movie. Which I would definitely love to see, because I'm like, there's definitely a lot of unresolved plot lines that definitely need to be, solved. So, of course, that makes sense. So, yeah, overall, definitely dug A Quiet Place Part 2. Thought it was really fantastic. One of those rare sequels, horror sequels too, that is able to take everything that was great about the first movie and improve upon it and make it better. Which, yeah, that's really something special. So yeah, overall, I'm going to give A Quiet Place Part 2 a 9 out of 10. And also to give you a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, I initially, for the opening of this review, I initially wanted to do an opening in which it would mainly be me, like, holding up pieces of paper, with, I wanted to initially do, like, I open up with holding a piece of paper with the words that I want to say, and I think, nah, this is stupid, I'm just going to keep talking. Or I would, more complexly, sign out the opening. Unfortunately, of course, because, that would take way too much time, I'm not going to do that. And I barely know anything about sign language. Like, I only know a few things. Like, I know this is Hollywood. I know this is friend. And a couple of other things. But, yeah, I don't know much about sign language to properly be able to do something like that. But, yeah. I really dug A Quiet Place Part 2. Now, I am going to be doing a review of In the Heights when it does end up releasing later on in the week. But there is another thing that I really want to talk about that some of you may or may not be aware of, at least in terms of my demographic of people. So there is something that I am going to be talking about later in the week, but definitely expect more content from me. In fact, I might even go out of my way and even upload it later in the day. I haven't quite figured it out at the time of currently recording this. But, yeah, definitely keep an eye out for a review of another video that I'm going to do, because, yeah, just keep an eye out. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to just like, subscribe, do all the other stuff that YouTubers tell you to constantly do all the time in order to make sure the fact that they have a steady career and are able to make enough money to be able to properly afford for the necessities of life. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay gold.